Naririnig ako, guys.
Yes po.
Okay, if I may ask, sino yung pwedeng mag-volunteer? Gagawin ko lang presenter para kapag may mga pumapasok na classmate nyo, kayo yung mag-a-accept sa kanila sa meeting. Pag nag-share kasi ako ng presentation, hindi ko makikita kung sino yung mga nagjo-join sa meeting. Baka hindi sila makapasok. Kalubiran? Okay lang sa'yo yun? Okay. I'll make you the presenter no. Ang gagawin mo lang, mag-accept ka lang ng mga classmate mo magjo-join. Thank you so much. Okay, siguro let's start na rin para hindi na tayo magtagal, no? Let me share my presentation first. Stop. Saan na? Is the presentation already visible on your end, guys?
Yes po.
Okay, there you go. Okay, anyway, for today's discussion, we're going to talk about speaking to inform and to persuade. And, I'm pretty sure that you all have already experienced or encountered a particular situation, diba, wherein you sat through a presentation and thought, wow, that person really knows what they're talking about. But what is this weird feeling that I'm not feeling? The message. Or maybe the opposite. You've watched someone speak with so much passion that the room was hooked. But when you thought about it later on, you realized that they didn't actually say much. No? And I'm pretty sure we all have already encountered that. We all have already, experienced that particular situation. Someone walks in, and then ang dami nilang sinabi. Parang alam na alam nila kung anong sinasabi nila. But, the main problem is that, bakit hindi ko nararamdaman yung message niya? Maganda naman sa pandinig ko yung sinasabi niya, pero bakit hindi ko nararamdaman? And may isang tao, no, may isang speaker na pumasok din. Pero that speaker had that ability na nahook niya agad yung attention ng audience niya from the beginning up until the ending. Everyone in the room was hooked. He or she immediately captured the attention of his or her targeted audiences. And then after the speech, when you thought about it later on, you realized, bakit ako na-hook? Ang galing naman niya. Pero konti lang yung sinabi niya. Hindi ba? That right there, class, is the difference between informing and persuading. And of course, both of them are essential in public speaking because sometimes your job is to teach, to explain, to break things down so that, people walk away understanding something that they didn't before. But other times, of course, your goal is to persuade. Your goal is to move people, to challenge what they believe, shift how they think, or push them to take action. And here's the kicker. The best speakers know how to do both. So today, we're going to dive into the art of speaking to inform and speaking to persuade, and of course, the methods that will help you to do it well. Because in a world full of noise, hindi ba, being heard is not enough. You've got to know how to make people care, think, and act. That is why for today, we're going to talk about speaking to inform, speaking to persuade, and the methods of persuasion. Let's start first with speaking to inform. Let me ask you something. Have you ever explained something to a friend? Like, let's say, for example, how a certain application works, if there's an update in a particular application, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, TikTok, or whatsoever. Or, like, for example, why the traffic's always bad at a certain hour. Or, for instance, before an exam or a quiz, di ba? Nag-explain tayo sa mga classmate natin if in any case that they weren't able to understand a particular concept of idea. And then at the latter part of the conversation of the explanation, they will most likely say, oo nga, gets. Oo, gets na, gets. Oh, now I get it. Yeah, I understand. Ganon, hindi ba? That's what we usually get after we finish the conversation. That click moment right there, that's informative speaking in action. Now, if we're going to scale that up, What if you had to explain a complex topic, like, for example, climate change, cryptocurrency, or even how AI works, to an audience that knows almost nothing about it? In that particular situation, you're not trying to convince them to agree or disagree. You just want them to understand, to walk away, not to walk away a little smarter, a little more aware, and a lot more curious. And this is what speaking to inform is all about. But then again, don't be fooled. No, speaking to inform is not just about reporting facts. It's an art. Because if your audience is bored, if they are confused or overwhelmed, the information is wasted. Masasayang lang siya. That is why for today, we're going to explore how you can inform with clarity, confidence, and maybe even a little spark so that your message doesn't just land, but actually sticks. Let's define it clearly. Speaking to inform means delivering knowledge clearly, accurately, and effectively. Now, your job as an informative speaker is not to argue or to persuade, but to help your audience understand something better than they did before. You need to think of yourself as a translator. No? You turn complex ideas into simple and engaging explanation. Because, the key goal in informative speaking is to convey accurate, relevant, and engaging information. Let's try to break it down. For accuracy, of course, the facts need to be correct. Kaya nga fact siya, di ba? You are responsible for the truth. What about relevance? For relevance, of course, the content should matter to your audience. Do not overload them with trivia. No? Always make it meaningful, lalong-lalo na kapag informative speeches. And then, of course, engaging. Diba? We all know that when it comes to facts, if you're going to present plain facts, plain evidence, plain statistic to your audience, it can really be boring if you present them poorly. Your tone, your examples, your structures, that's what makes the difference. And finally, of course, why is this important? Why is this important? Because, of course, we don't just speak to inform when we're giving speeches. We do it every day. Like, let's say, for example, in school. Diba, in school, you explain your report to your classmates. In the workplace, I don't know if some of you are already working. In the workplace, you present updates to your boss or team. That's an example of informative speaking. And even in real life situations, in your day-to-day interaction with other people, diba? When you are helping a friend understand a particular topic, a current issue, or walk someone through a process, that is an example of informative speaking. So basically, when it comes to informative speech, we do it every day. So whether you're a teacher, you're a student, a manager, a coach, or a friend, knowing how to explain things clearly is one of the most powerful tools you'll ever have. So you need to remember that when it comes to informing, it is actually not just about dumping information. Hindi pwedeng basta-basta ka lang magbabato ng information, no? It's about making knowledge coming alive. So, with regards to that, now that we know no, the purpose of informative speaking, the next big question is, what can you actually talk about in an informative speech? No? When it comes to that, we typically divide informative speeches into four major types, and each one of them focuses on a different kind of subject matter. The first one that we have speeches about objects. When it comes to speeches about objects, this focuses on tangible things like the physical items, the people, the places, or even animals. For example, you could actually talk about the history of the Eiffel Tower. Or like, for example, if we're talking about inventions, how the Tesla car was invented. Or even, now you can also talk about the life of a famous athlete or scientist. Anyway, the key here is to describe the object in a way that gives your audience a clear mental picture. What it looks like, how it functions, and why it matters. And then next that we have is speeches about processes. This basically explain how something works or how something is done or made. So you might actually want to think of topics like how hurricanes form, how to bake sourdough bread, no, or how, for example, how cryptocurrency transaction work, and etc. The goal is either to help your audience understand the process or to enable them to actually perform it themselves. That means clarity and sequence are everything in here. The chronological processes are really so important in here. Step by step is your best friend. And then the third type is a speech about events. Now, this, from the word itself, events, of course, this covers significant occurrences. Now, either in the past, the present, or even ongoing ones. For example, you might actually want to talk about the civil rights movement, ano pa ba, the COVID-19 pandemic, anything about a particular occurrence. Or, for example, the annual Mascara Festival in the Philippines, Ati-Atihan Festival in the Philippines, and etc. With event speeches kasi, your job is to highlight what happened, why it happened, and what impact it had. So you need to make sure to present it with accuracy, but also with narrative flow so that it feels like a story rather than a list of dates and facts. And then finally, of course, this one's the most abstract. We have speeches about concepts. And this typically tackle ideas, abstract ideas, beliefs, theories, and even philosophies. So some of the examples that we have right here are existentialism, human rights, ano pa ba. Ito yung mga concepts or ideas na hindi natin nahawakan, pero nasa isip natin. Can you give me some of the topics that can be under speeches about concepts, aside from the topics that were given right here? Aside from existentialism, human rights, ano pa yung naiisip niyong topic under this particular speech? Anyone from the class? Sabi ko nga, naiisip natin, pero hindi natin nahawakan. These are the ideas, beliefs, philosophies, or whatsoever. Mental health can also be under the speeches about concepts. What else? Anyone from the class? Anyone?
Ma'am,
Intangible. Yes?
pwede po yung death penalty po, considered po siya.
Huh?
Yung death penalty.
Death penalty, yes. No? It can be a topic under this particular type of informative speech. Yes, Navarro.
Ma'am, yung kwan po ba ma'am kasali yung mga theories?
Yes, kasama ang theories. What theory?
For example, ma'am, yung Big Bang theories, ganun po ma'am, or yung mga
Yes.
theories about sa mga, kunyari ma'am, yung pag-develop ng bata hanggang sa lumaki, ganun ma'am.
Yes, yes. Those are examples of speeches about concepts. Yes, Dakanay.
Ma'am, climate change.
Climate change. Yes, another good example. Meron pa ba? There are actually a lot. Yes, Bondo.
Debate po, ma'am.
Debate about what? Debate, yes.
Religious
Debate.
yung religion po, ma'am.
Religion. Okay, religion. Yes. That can also be a topic under speeches about concepts. And actually, anything that you can actually think of. No, wait lang, may nag-message. History, yes, even history. Kasama siya dito sa speeches about concepts. Even emotional intelligence, minimalism, ano pa ba, laws, yan, religion, yung nabanggit nga kanina, anything that you can actually think of. Yung mga naiisip natin sa utak natin pero hindi naman talaga natin nahawakan. Even the concept of public speaking, no, anything, everything. So basically, these speeches will going to challenge you to take something that's intangible, but make it understandable. So you will really need to use examples, definitions, and comparisons, whatever it is that will going to help the audience grasp the concept and connect it to real life. But here's the thing. Even if, sabi ko nga, di ba, during the midterm period, this is the one that I kept on emphasizing before. Even if your topic is amazing, your speech won't actually make sense if you do not have a solid structure, right? So you really need to think of a structure like the skeleton of your speech because it holds everything together and helps your audience follow along without getting lost. In an informative speech or informative speaking, there are actually three common ways to organize your main points. And I'm pretty sure that you are are already familiar with this one since we have already tackled this during the midterm period, yung strategical organizational pattern. And kasama rin siya, included siya sa midterm exam nyo. No? So ngayon, um, this is specifically for informative speeches only. We only have three: chronological, spatial, and topical. Let's start first with chronological. From the word itself, chronology, no? This structure is all about time. So we're dealing with a chronological sequence, chronological order of a particular occurrence from past to present or from the first step to the last. You might actually want to use this particular organizational pattern if you're talking about the history of something, the history of an invention, the evolution of a movement, or it can also be the steps in the process. Basically, if there is a need for a chronological sequence, if there is a need for the right sequence or order of a particular event, chronological order suits best for your organizational pattern in your speech. And then the second one, we also have spatial order. This one is actually all about space and location. No? You organize your speech based on how things are arranged physically or geographically. And when it comes to spatial order, dahil nga space ang pinag-uusapan natin, relationships, physical layout, you might actually want to use it when you are describing a place, like for example, a museum or city, a building, or a system layout, ganyan, or even, no? You can also talk about the parts of the human brain. Kasi nga, space and location naman. So basically, in spatial order, you're essentially guiding the audience through space like a tour guide. And then the third one is topical order. Um, Topical order, you are grouping information into categories. This is the most flexible and common structure. So you simply divide your topic into logical categories or subtopics, and then you use topical order if your subject doesn't follow a timeline or spatial layout. Just a set of ideas that make sense when they are grouped together. And nung chinek ko naman, yung mga midterm examination nyo, most of you have actually utilized topical order. And I would like to applaud you on that part kasi tama yung pag-apply nila ng topical order doon. No? For example, familiar naman kayo with journaling, right? Yung kapag parang sa diary, nagsusulat kayo pero may mga pinipaste din kayo. Familiar kayo sa journaling, right? Familiar ba?
Opo.
Yes po.
Okay.
Yes.
For example, if we're talking about the benefits of journaling, my first point can actually be the mental health benefits. Basically, it directly relates to my main topic, which is the benefits of journaling. Point number 2, I can say productivity and focus. And then for the third benefit, I can actually write down emotional processing. So basically, those are the 3 benefits of journaling. If you will going to notice, that is the outline of my speech in which every point I'm going to expand that when I will be delivering my topic on the spot. So basically, topical order works great for concepts, objects, and issues where you can chunk the information into themes. And whatever it is, whatever organizational pattern you want or you decide to choose, your job as a speaker is to pick the structure that best fits your content and helps your audience follow your message effortlessly. Because you know, the truth is, if people can't follow your speech, they won't remember it. If hindi nila nasusundan yung sinasabi mo, hindi nila maaalala yon. So you've chosen a topic, you've organized your content. But here's the real deal. Sabi ko nga, even the best topics can fall flat if you don't deliver them effectively. Delivery is really crucial here. That is why In order to address that particular issue, let's talk about the 4 key principles that separate forgettable topics into a memorable ones. Rule number 1, do not overestimate audience knowledge. Ay, ba't ganun yung line? Do not assume, guys. Do not assume that your audience already knows what you know. One of the biggest mistake speakers make is jumping into technical details or advanced terms without giving background. Before you give a presentation in front of your classmates, in front of everyone, in front of your audiences, ask yourself, if I were hearing this for the first time, would it make sense to me? Kapag ako ba yung nasa posisyon nila as an audience, may intindihan ko ba to? Kapag ganito ako mag-construct ng language, kapag ganito ako gumamit ng words, may intindihan ko ba to considering na hindi ko pa alam yung topic beforehand? Ask yourself that question. You don't really need to dumb things down, but you do need to explain thoroughly. You give definitions, you provide context, as well as examples. Because when your audience is lost, it doesn't matter how smart your content is. Principle number 2, relate subject to the audience. Make it matter to them. No, it's not enough to just present facts. You have to show your audience why they should care. Ask yourself, how does this topic affect their lives? Is there really an impact? If I'm going to discuss this topic and they will going to listen to me, will there be an effect? Can it help them solve a problem? Is there a story or trend that connects with their experiences? Diba, ask yourself those questions. Because when your topic feels personal, people are more likely to stay engaged. And here's another big one. Avoid being too technical. Avoid information overload. It's actually really tempting to throw every detail that you've researched on. But you need to remember, you are speaking and not writing a textbook. So whenever you are presenting something, use plain language. If you do need to introduce technical terms, you explain them clearly. Think of yourself as a bridge between complex information and human understanding. And then finally, of course, make it real. How will you make it real? By using clear examples, comparison, and personalization. Now, with regards to examples, kasi it helps people visualize something. With comparison, it helps people relate to something. And then with personal stories, when you are giving personal stories, it makes ideas stick. Diba? Let's say, for example, you're explaining a complex scientific concept. You might want to compare it to something similar, to something familiar. No? Maybe tell a short anecdote, tell a short story that shows its real life impact. Because when people see what you mean, they remember it longer. Again, informative speaking is not just about sharing knowledge, guys. It's about making that knowledge click. And when it clicks, that's when true learning begins. Okay, now let's move on to another powerful form of public speaking, which is persuasive speaking or speaking to persuade. With speaking to persuade, this is actually not just about telling people what you think. It's about making them rethink what they believe in. It's about influencing attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors through the way you use your voice, your message, and even your logic. So basically, this is where speech meets strategy. If we're going to define it clearly, persuasive speaking is the art of influencing beliefs, attitudes, or actions through speech. In simpler terms, you're not just delivering information, you're delivering a mission. You're trying to convince your audience to believe in something, to feel strongly about it, or do something about it. That's why, persuasive speaking is often the most challenging, but also the most impactful form of communication. And the purpose here is so straightforward. It is to convince audiences to accept a viewpoint or take an action. Whether it's urging them to recycle more, support a policy, or rethink a social issue, you are driving them toward a change. But let me be clear with this one. You are not forcing an idea to them. No, you are not forcing. You are persuading. Because when it comes to persuading, It involves logic, credibility, and emotional appeal. And that takes skill. But here's the real challenge, guys. And this is actually the big one. When it comes to persuasion, we all know people don't like to be told that they are wrong. Do you agree with me in that particular statement? People don't like to be told that they are wrong. Raise your hand, or not raise your hand. Use the emojis that we have right here in the MS Teams if you are agreeing with me. People don't like to be told that they are wrong. 'Di ba? Most of the time, it actually really depends on the situation. Meron kasi tayong tinatawag na constructive criticism, no? Na kapag sinabing mali tayo, dahil nga nasa frame siya ng constructive criticism and ina-accept natin yon, hindi natin binibigtin. Ina-accept natin na talagang mali tayo. But then again, sabi ko nga, it really depends on the situation because there are several instances na, for instance, magtataka ka bakit for example, sinabing mali ka, hindi mo makita kung saan yung mali, ganyan. Or like, for example, may effect din kasi yun kung ano yung relationship mo doon sa kausap mo. Right? So, basically, minsan kapag sinasabi na mali tayo, yung iba, tinitake yun as constructive criticism, yung iba naman talagang na-offend. So, in general talaga, in most circumstances, people don't like to be told that they are wrong. Who would like that? Hindi ba? Kasi nga meron tayong sari-sariling beliefs, meron tayong sari-sariling biases, meron tayong mga filters, meron tayong mga gustong paniwalaan, tsaka hindi paniwalaan. At iba-iba tayo when it comes to those different aspects. Aside from that, aside from people not wanting to be told that they are wrong, people are often stubborn, right? Even if we are actually being faced with facts. And yun nga yung nangyayari, Rex, sa online interaction kapag nakikipag-communicate tayo online. Kung mapapansin nyo sa mga comment section, kahit hindi kayo, kahit sa ibang tao, kapag may pinapaniwalaan silang isa, kahit anong isend mo sa kanila na facts, evidence, or whatever it is that supports your argument, hindi nila papaniwalaan yon. Kasi it is actually a human nature. We are so stubborn. People are stubborn in nature. That's also one of the biggest challenges when it comes to persuasion. That is because we all have that kind of biases that filter what we're willing to believe in. So, persuasion is really, powerful. But it really takes a skill. It is so hard to persuade someone with a strong, belief about something. If they are too stubborn, whenever they have strong biases, whenever they have strong moral implication about a particular concept. So when it comes to persuasive speaking class, it is not just about what you say. It's about what the audience is willing to hear and how you deliver it. So you as the speaker, you have to overcome resistance to change. You have to navigate through skepticism. Kapag sinabi nating skepticism, ang mga tao kasi naturally talaga, nagda-doubt tayo sa mga naririnig natin. Lalo kapag alam natin na pinapersuade tayo ng kausap natin. 'Di ba? Doubtful tayo in nature. Dapat naman talaga ganun tayo. And of course, you as the speaker, you need to break past mental filters that says, I already know what I believe. Yun nga yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, di ba? Avoid prejudging the speaker. Yung midterm period. Kasi minsan, kapag narinig natin yung topic, ay alam ko na yan eh, ba't ko papapakinggan? Ay alam ko na yan eh. Huwag mo nang kwento. Ganyan tayo minsan. Di ba? Puro tayo, alam ko na yan, alam ko na yan. Oh. The ending, the tendency is that we will be refusing to listen to the content itself, and then we will refuse to believe in whatever information it is that will be sent to us, that will be relayed to us. Kasi nga may mindset tayo na, I already know about that. Alam ko na kung ano papaniwalaan ko, wag mo nang ituloy. 'Di ba? Without really knowing, baka mamaya may something new dun sa ibibigay niya. Tapos dinismiss mo na agad yung whole idea. That's why you really need to listen first, no, before you prejudge the content or the speaker itself. That's why when it comes to persuasive speaking, it isn't actually just performance, it's a strategy. So you need to think of yourself not as a preacher, but as a guide. You're leading your audience from where they are to where you want them to be, step by step. Because when persuasion is done right, it doesn't feel like a pressure. It feels like clarity. And when you're delivering a persuasive speech, of course, diba, your goal really matters. And it is so important to choose the right approach for the message that you're trying to convey. That is why here are actually the three main types of persuasive speeches. The first one that we have is questions of fact. No, this type of persuasive speech argues the truth of claim. Now, for in a simpler statement, if we're going to paraphrase it in a simpler manner, when you're speaking about a question of fact, you're presenting your audience with something you believe is true, and then convincing them that it's verifiable, that it's factual and undebatable. Like what we did during our class debate, di ba? Meron kayong sariling stand. Meron kayong sariling arguments. And what you did at that time is convincing your other classmates that your argument is factual and verifiable. Some of you have even presented evidence like from the news, or some of you even gave us a statistic about something. Basically, that's question of fact. You are proving something that is right. No, the goal there is to persuade your audience to believe a specific fact is accurate. So basically, in this one, you'll rely heavily on evidence like statistics, studies, and even experts to back up your claims. Next, we also have questions of value. No, when it comes to questions of value, this actually involves making an ethical or moral judgment. With the question of value, you are trying to convince the audience that something is good, that something is bad, something is right, or something is wrong. For example, capital punishment is wrong. Yan. Pero let's think of another example to contextualize it. Do you know the story of Robin Hood? Do you know the story of Robin Hood? Can anyone share to the class briefly ano yung story ni Robin Hood? Ano yung pinaka main point doon? Like the gist. Ano yung story ni Robin Hood para alam din ng iba? Sino yung may alam ng story ni Robin Hood? Guys. Ay. Who knows the story of Robin Hood?
Ma'am, yung alam ko lang,
Yes, go ahead.
Nagnanakaw siya.
Nagna-
Nagnanakaw siya sa mayaman para tulungan yung mga mahihirap.
Okay, yes, exactly. No, nagnanakaw siya sa mga mayayaman na corrupt and may mga anomalies para tumulong sa mga mahirap. Wait lang, natawa ako dito sa sinabi ni Kalubiran. Yung may lobo po ba yan? Little Red Riding Hood. Okay. Now, that's the story of Robin Hood. No, ang ginagawa ni Robin Hood, again, sino yung nagsalita? Yung surname niya? Nakalimutan ko. Sino yung nagsalita kanina? Para i-record ko. Bautista. Okay. Now, the story of Robin Hood actually is exactly what Bautista has shared to us. So, basically, ang ginagawa ni Robin Hood, nagnanakaw siya sa mga mayayaman, yung mga mayayaman na may mga corrupt practices, may anomalies na may mga ginagawa. Tapos, yung ninanakaw niya, tinutulong niya sa mga mahihirap. That's actually a perfect example of questions of value. It will going to make you think whether a particular situation is good or bad, if it is right or wrong. In that particular scenario, can someone share with us his or her perspective about that particular situation? Do you think what Robin Hood did is right or wrong?
Right po.
Right? Why? Why right? Sino yung nagsalita kanina? Okay, yes, Torres.
Ma'am, sa tingin ko po hindi po.
Why?
Kasi ma'am, even kahit sabihin po natin na good yung intention niya na tumutulong siya sa ibang tao, lalo sa mahihirap, mali pa rin po yung kumuha ng hindi galing talaga sa inyo. Mas maganda po yung tumulong ka ng galing mismo sa sarili mo.
Okay, that's a good point, no? Yes, Navarro.
Ma'am, hindi siya right, hindi rin po siya wrong. Kasi ma'am Kwan, right siya kasi tumulong siya sa iba ma'am. Tapos yung naging wrong po doon, hindi po man naging maganda sa batas o mali po sa batas yung ginawa niya ma'am.
Okay, but if you were going to, if someone strictly says that you need to pick one side, which side will you choose? Right or wrong? Navarro?
Ma'am, I think ma'am right po.
Right? Mas naglilid ka sa right?
Yes ma'am.
Okay. Yes, Bautista? Nag-raise ka ba ng hand o nakalimutan mo lang? Nakalimutan mo lang ba? Baba ko na ha. Okay, there you go. Ay, wait, nahirapan akong tingnan yung mga messages. Hindi rin. Galing sa nakaw. Okay. Actually, no, if you were going to notice, your classmates has a different perspective, and even you might have a different take on that particular issue. That's what I'm referring when it comes to how complex persuasion is when it comes to questions of value. It will really assess your ethical or moral judgment, no? Because your goal right there is not to convince your audience of an objective truth. It's about changing their mindset based on values. If you, for example, one speaker, no, pareho pala ng situation yung kay Robin Hood. One speaker. That particular speaker is actually persuading you to think na tama yung ginawa ni Robin Hood. Kasi, yung pera naman na ninakaw niya, para naman talaga yon sa mga mahihirap na kinurakot lang or ninakaw ng mga mayayaman dahil sa mga anomalies or corrupt practices nila. So, tama lang na ibalik yon sa mga may-ari talaga. What if ganun yung mindset or yung mismong topic ng speech ng speaker? But then again, dito na papasok yung complexity ng question of value. If you were going to notice nga, iba-iba tayo ng pinapaniwalaan. We have that strong reasoning and strong moral principle that we really value. Torres actually mentioned that it is not right. No, it is not right in a sense that oo, tinulong niya sa may hirap pero mali yung naging way niya ng pagtulong. Ninakaw niya yon, hindi ba? So another thing, kanina sinabi naman nung isa, it is right, it is wrong. It is right in a sense na iyon din, tinulong niya sa may hirap, ninakaw lang din naman yon nung pinagnakawan niya. And then it is wrong in a sense na kapag kinonsider sa batas, hindi talaga siya tama kasi nakaw is nakaw. Diba? We have differing opinions. We have, pero dun sa, kay Navarro ba yun? Kay Navarro, yes, mas naglilin siya sa tama. Na tama lang daw na ginawa yon. Actually, we have the tendency, no, as people, kapag hindi natin talaga kinoconsider ang batas, tama lang yan, okay lang yan. Nangyayari yan sa internet. Kasi nga, di ba, pag sa internet, nakatago ang mga personalities, nakatago ang identity, hindi mo talaga matatrack minsan masyado lahat, kaya matapang lahat sa internet, strong personality tayo halos, no? So as you can see, iba-iba tayo ng biases, iba-iba tayo ng ethical and moral judgment about something, and that's what makes question of value complex. What if another audience tells you that that is actually wrong in a sense? Because the end doesn't justify the means. Oo, tama yung ginawa niya, na tumulong siya sa magnanakaw, but then again, yung pagtulong na yun, that doesn't justify na tama rin yung ginawa niya sa pagnanakaw. 'Di ba? So that's the real problem, not a problem. Instead, a challenge when it comes to questions of value. Lalong-lalo na kapag pinag-uusapan natin ay ethical and moral judgment. So, you, as a speaker, if you want to take on a topic that is actually under questions of value, you as the speaker, you require a strong reasoning and moral principles to yourself in order to persuade them. Kasi kung hindi strong yung paniniwala mo, yung mga moral principles and values na meron ka, baka instead na ma-persuade mo sila, sila pa ang mag-persuade sa'yo. Diba? Yun yung delikado when it comes to persuasive speeches. No, hindi siya delikado in a sense na kapag surface level lang yung topic nyo na pwedeng pag-usapan. Eh, what if yung topic mo pala sobrang complex? And it's such a taboo topic kapag kino-consider na sa iba. So you really need to think about that if you want to take on questions of value. And then we also have, of course, questions of policy. Now, this is where you advocate specific actions or changes in behaviors, even the rules and the laws. So basically, you're asking your audience to take action. And this could mean voting for something, changing a behavior, or supporting a particular policy. Like the example that we have right here, the electoral college should be abolished. No? So as you can see, in this type of persuasive speech, you argue for a change. Just like when we are doing street rallies, diba? What they are actually utilizing right here is the question of policy. They are arguing for a change, and then they are providing solutions, plans, and benefits of taking the action. So basically, kung mapapansin nyo kung nakikinig kayo ng mga speeches sa mga rally, diba? They are demonstrating why the current system doesn't work and why their proposed policy is a better solution. That's a perfect example of questions of policy. Now, the key takeaway in this particular slide is that each of this type of persuasive speech, each of these types of persuasive speeches actually serve a different purpose. So when you're preparing your speech, you need to ask yourself, am I proving something through? Because if yes, that is question of fact. Am I convincing my audience of something's moral value? That's questions of value. Am I asking for a specific action or a policy change? That's question of policy. Again, class, your goal actually shapes how you will structure and deliver your message. Okay, now that we've discussed the types of persuasive speeches, let's deal with the question on how to structure your argument. No? Because how you organize your speech can really make a huge difference in whether your message will really resonate within your audiences. So the first one that we have is problem solution order. Again, yung kaninang sa kasi yung sa informative speeches natin, what are the 3 organizational pattern under the informative speeches? Anyone from the class? Kakaano lang natin kanina. Yes, Torres.
We have chronological order po,
Mhm.
spatial order, and topical order.
Okay, exactly. So for informative speeches, we only have 3: chronological order, the spatial order, and topical order. And then when it comes to persuasive speeches, we now have 4 organizational pattern. Let's start first with problem solution order. Again, familiar na kayo dito. This is actually one of the simplest and most direct ways to structure your speech. Because basically, what you need to do is to present the problem first, and then offer a resolution or solution to that problem. And this works well when the issue at hand is clear-cut and needs immediate action. You might actually want to use this approach if you were giving a speech about, for example, reducing plastic waste, mga ganyan, di ba? For example, if I were to say a statement like, plastic pollution is a major environmental issue. So I have presented the problem. And then again, I will be adding additional statement to offer a resolution to that problem. What if I say, But we can fix this by switching to biodegradable alternatives. If you will going to notice in just one sentence, I have provided the problem and then offered a resolution. It's straightforward. When it comes to problem solution order, it's straightforward. You establish the problem and then explain how it can be resolved. So basically, people get the why and the how, and then they are ready to move toward the action. The next one that we have is problem cause solution order. Now, this one goes a step deeper. It doesn't just explain the issue, it goes back to the root cause before offering the solution. So what you need to do is to first present the problem. Second, explain the root cause of the problem. And then third, you offer a solution. Now, you offer a solution. So for example, if our topic is about, if we're talking about cyberbullying, no, I might say something like, first, sabi nga natin, present the problem. Cyberbullying is a growing issue. And then I need to explain the root cause of that problem. Cyberbullying is a growing issue that is caused by the rise of social media platforms where anonymity thrives. Okay, meron na ako. I presented the problem. I have identified the root cause. Now, what's left hanging is the solution. I now need to offer a solution. What should I say? To solve this, we need stricter regulations on online behaviors and etc. and etc. So basically, with that particular pattern, di ba, that is effective because it makes the solution more logical. And once you understand the cause, the solution feels more necessary. Now, the next one that we have is comparative advantages order. This one is a bit more complex because basically you're comparing multiple solutions to a problem and then convincing your audience why one is better than the rest. No? So, ang gagawin mo dito, you present two or more potential solutions and then after you present different solutions, you compare the advantages and disadvantages of each. And then at the latter part, you highlight the best option. You highlight the best one. For example, if you're persuading your audience to support renewable energy, you might actually compare, no? Sabi mo, we could invest in solar power, wind power, or hydroelectric power. And then, give the benefits, give the advantages and disadvantages of it. And then after giving the advantages and disadvantages, you highlight the best option. You might actually say something like, solar power is the most sustainable option because, and then you provide the solution, it's affordable, it's scalable, or whatsoever. So in that particular structure, it helps your audience see the merits of your solution in comparison to other, which will make your argument stronger. And then finally, we have Monroe's motivated sequence. Now, this is actually the classic 5-step model used to inspire action. And this is perfect for speeches wherein your goal is not just to convince, but also to move your audience to do something. Kapag sinabi natin to move your audience to do something, we are actually appealing to their emotional aspect. No, we are making an appeal to their emotions. Let's say this is actually how it breaks down. First, the attention. You need to capture the audience interest. After you actually captured their curiosity and interest, you establish the problem that is under the need. And then you deal with the satisfaction. You present a solution to that problem. After you presented the solution, you need the power of visualization. You need to show them the benefits of taking an action. And then once you show them the benefits, you encourage an audience response to take the next step. That is where the action will take place. Now, let's contextualize it. Let's put it in an example. Let's say we're talking about the importance of donating blood. The first statement that I might, say for the attention part, since this is actually a step-by-step process, is that I might say something like, did you know that someone needs blood every 2 seconds? With that particular statement, I have already captured audience interest. That's one. And then I'm going to add, the shortage of blood donations is a serious issue, and hospitals can't meet demand. With my second statement, it's clear that I have already presented the problem, the main problem. No? And then, Since sinabi ko, hospitals can't meet demand, I now need to provide the solution. But by donating just one pint, you can save up to 3 lives. That's the solution that I have offered. Now, what about the benefits of taking an action? You need the visualization. This is where you will going to appeal to the audience emotion. No, I might say something like, imagine knowing that you helped a mother save her child, or a car accident victim survive their injuries. Diba? You help your audience imagine something. You help your audience visualize something. And then you encourage a response from your audience. I might say something like, join the blood drive today and become a lifesaver. So that's Monroe's motivated sequence. No? Clearly, this model is incredibly effective because it taps into emotion and gives your audience a clear action to take. But then again, sabi ko nga as a speaker, you need to remember that the key is to pick the one that aligns with your goal, with your topic. If you're aiming to move your audience to action, Monroe's sequence might be the one to use. But if it's about presenting a clear solution, problem solution might work best. You know? It depends on you. It depends on you. It depends on the topic, and it depends on your goal. And of course, it is also important to question on the ethical responsibility, the ethical consideration that we must, we must highlight, we must place an importance when it comes to persuasion, how we go about persuading. Because when it comes to ethics and persuasion, this is actually about making sure that you're not only convincing your audience, but doing it in a way that is honest, fair, and respectful. So first and foremost, sabi ko nga, honesty and fairness. These are actually the foundations of ethical persuasion, no? You should never deceive or manipulate your audience into believing something that's not true. That's what I keep on pointing out even during our midterm period. If you're presenting facts or arguing a position, make sure that your arguments are based on accurate information. This means to say that you cannot misrepresent opposing views just to make your argument stronger. And this is known as intellectual dishonesty. Your audience deserves to hear the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable or inconvenient. No? Second, logical fallacies. Talking about logical fallacies, these are the errors in reasoning that can make your argument seem stronger than it actually is. So avoiding this is really an ethical responsibility in persuasive speaking. And here are some of the examples, like the personal attacks. Are you familiar with ad hominem? Naririnig niyo na ba siya? Ad hominem.
Yes, ma'am.
What is ad hominem?
Ma'am, kunyari po nagde-debate or nagde-debate po kayo yung kalaban mo, and then bigla niya pong ipinasok yung personal issues mo, ma'am. Yun po yung pagkakaalam ko lang po, ma'am.
Oh, exactly. That's right, no? If we're talking about ad hominem, those are personal attacks. You are basically attacking the person instead of the argument. For example, just like what Navarro has mentioned, no? If you're talking about or if you're arguing about something, tas wala nang masabi yung kausap mo, ang gagawin nila, magbibigay siya ng argument pero out of the topic. Ang gagawin niya, magbibigay siya ng argument pero personal attack na yun sa'yo. It can be a personal, it can be an attack about your personal life, or it can actually be an attack about your physical, what do you call this? Your physical attributes. Like that's it, for example, kapag sa online, di ba napapansin niyo? Marami dyan sa comment section. Nag-argue sila, nagde-debate sila about a particular topic. But then again, kapag wala nang masabi yung isa, sasabihin niya, ewan ko sa'yo, kalbo ka naman. May mga nababasa kayong ganon. Or something like that. Mga ganong mga context. Like, ewan ko sa'yo, bahala ka dyan, kalbo ka naman. Ewan ko sa'yo, bahala ka dyan, mga ganyan. Ewan ko sa'yo, mga ganyan. Anyway, kahit anong sabihin mo, di pa rin na, kunyari, mas maganda ako sa'yo, ganyan-ganyan. Those are personal attacks. No? Basically, you are stepping outside the topic. No? So you are blocking, you are dismissing their arguments. You are not clearly listening or carefully listening, thoroughly listening to their arguments. But what you are only focusing are their physical attributes or the personal issues that they have. That's ad hominem, and you need to avoid that when it comes to persuasion, no? The personal attacks. Lalong-lalo na, umusbong yan nung nung, kailan ba i-search ang internet? Nung BBM versus Lenny? Nung nagbibigayan na ng mga nagawa ng mga political candidates na sinusuportahan ng bawat isa. Hindi ba? Kapag wala nang ma-reason out yung isa, personal attack na ang ibabato. Kaya nga, na-popularize yung word na ad hominem na yan. Kaya halos lahat familiar na rin dyan, which is good, no? Anyway, those are examples of ad hominem. Another thing is misleading statistics. You also need to avoid this thing, using numbers out of context to deceive. For example, kapag sinabi kong 90% of the Filipino people loves pizza, pero ang totoo, 10 Pilipino lang naman talaga yung in-interview ko. Do you think that my statistic is reliable and correct? What do you think? Sabi ko 90% of the Filipino people loves pineapple on their pizza. Pero yung in-interview ko 10 lang naman. Do you think my statistics are correct?
Hindi po.
No.
No, ma'am.
No. Diba? Definitely no. If you're going to notice, that statistic is actually misleading because the survey only asked a specific group and didn't account for other important factors. So you really need to avoid those kind of fallacies and stick to logical sound reasoning because your credibility really depends on it. And speaking of credibility, make sure that you use credible evidence and reasoning, no, to back up your claims. When you present statistics, facts, or even personal anecdotes, you need to make sure that they come from trusted sources. Like, for example, scientific journals, recognized experts, or reputable news outlets, no? If you're going to think about it, for example, if you're arguing that exercise improves mental health, you need research from psychological studies or health organizations and not just anecdotal evidence, diba? Because the more reliable your sources, the more persuasive your argument will be. And finally, let's talk about audience skepticism. Kapag sinabi nating audience skepticism, diba? People are naturally skeptical. What's skeptical? We are naturally doubtful. Sabi ko nga, tama lang naman yon. Lalong-lalo na kapag alam natin na pinopersuade tayo. Kailangan talaga, maano na tayo mag-isip. Tama ba talaga yung sinasabi niya o hindi? Kailangan kong i-recheck yon. Ganun dapat. We are skeptical in nature. And as a speaker, you need to acknowledge that and address their doubts head on. For example, if you're trying to persuade an audience on a particular topic, no, you need to proactively address their skepticism. You show your audience that you respect their concerns and are prepared to answer them honestly. Because in that way, that will further build trust and makes your argument even more convincing. Now, in this way, when you persuade, you not only convince your audience, but you also empower them to make informed and thoughtful decisions based, of course, on the messages that you have provided them. And then now let's talk about methods of persuasion. No? All right, let's dive into the 3, not 4. Last sem pa kasi itong PowerPoint. Okay, 3 key methods of persuasion. The first one that we have is credibility or ethos. The second one is evidence or logos. And then the third one is emotional appeal or pathos. Ma'am, what about the reasoning? Reasoning is actually under the evidence or logos. Since reasoning also deals with a logical argument. And with logical argument, that is already incorporated with evidence or logos. No, so basically, these are the methods of persuasion or the modes of persuasion according to Aristotle. Take note of that one. No, this is Aristotle's 3 modes of persuasion, the one that I have already introduced to you during the midterm period. The first one is credibility. Of course, this is about your expertise and trustworthiness. If you're going to put it simply, if your audience doesn't believe you, they won't listen to you. That is why establishing your credibility is really crucial in making your argument credible and persuasive. Then the second one, the logos or the evidence, no? This is where the facts, statistics, expert testimonies come in. You need supporting materials that back up your claims because when it comes to logos, it further ensures that your audience sees your argument as logical and well supported. Then we also have reasoning. This is about constructing a logical argument, not that leads your audience from point A to point B. Again, sabi ko nga, reasoning is under logos. And then the third one that we have is the emotional appeal. Emotion. We've all heard that people are moved by emotions, right? And this is no different in persuasive speaking. So connecting with your audience on an emotional level can really make your argument more powerful and memorable. So those are the three modes of persuasion: ethos, logos, and pathos. Okay, let's talk about more about the credibility or the ethos. Now, credibility actually doesn't just happen overnight, di ba? It's something that you must build before, during, and after your speech. You need to think of it like a bridge, that each stage of your speech will going to help strengthen that bridge between you and your audience. So you really need to take those things into consideration so that your audience will more likely to trust you even more. So the first one that we have is the initial credibility. Now, this is the credibility that you have before you even open your mouth. When you first step on stage and and start your presentation, your audience already has an idea of who you are and what you're about. How will you be able to build this type of credibility, this first stage of credibility? You need to start by explaining your expertise on the topic. If you're talking about climate change, for example, you might want to briefly mention your background or your research about it. And you can also establish common ground by showing that you understand your audience needs or values. That's initial credibility. Next, derived credibility. With derived credibility, this is actually what you earn during your speech, no? And it's built through your delivery, your argumentation, and how well you support your claims. So since during speech, yung pinag-uusapan natin, by being fluent and expressive in your delivery, the more confident and passionate you appear, the more your audience will going to trust you. That is why clear and engaging delivery can really boost your credibility significantly. Then we also have terminal credibility. This is the lasting impression that you leave after your speech ends. It's the credibility that your audience walks away with. So by leaving your audience with a strong positive impression, if you've been clear, if you've been credible, if you sound so confident throughout your speech, your audience will remember you as a trusted authority long after you finish speaking. And now to build all that credibility that we have right here, you need to explain first your expertise. Sabi ko nga kanina, you need to make sure that your audience know why you're qualified to talk about the topic because that will give you an authority from the start. And then after that, you establish a common ground. You need to show that you understand the audience perspective because they will more likely to listen to you if they feel like you understand them. And then third, deliver fluently and expressively. Speak confidently. Speak with energy. Because the way you deliver your message, the way you deliver your speech can really have a huge impact on how credible you seem. And then, of course, when you are presenting evidence, you need to be specific. You need to avoid vague statements. You also need to use novel information. No, you introduce new or surprising information because when it comes to surprising evidence, it really keeps your audience engaged and makes your argument more compelling. Also, you cite credible sources, diba? Your audience is going to want to know where your evidence comes from. So you really need to always make sure to cite credible sources, use data from reputable sources, from reputable organizations, peer-reviewed journals, ganyan, or recognized experts. If you're quoting statistics, for instance, no, be sure that they come from a source that the audience will trust. You need to remember, class, credibility breeds credibility. That's the truth. And then last but not the least, make connections. No? It's actually not enough to just throw evidence at your audience. You need to link the evidence clearly to your claims. Don't assume that the audience will automatically understand the connection. If you present a statistic, you also need to explain why it matters and how it supports your argument. So those are the four things that you need to take into consideration if you want to present a strong evidence to your targeted audiences. Now that we're done with credibility, let's talk about the logos or the logical reasoning. With logos, we have four types of reasoning right here. The first one is specific instances. With specific instances, this is also called as the inductive reasoning. Now, inductive. Because in this type of reasoning, it involves looking at specific examples and drawing a general conclusion based on that. For example, if you observe that every time it rains, people carry umbrellas, you might actually conclude that when it rains, people tend to carry umbrellas. Simple as that. You're using patterns to make a broader point. That's specific instances. Next, principle-based. Principle-based or deductive reasoning, from general to specific arguments. No? You will start with a general principle or rule and then apply it to specific situation. For example, pag sinabi kong all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Diba? Have you noticed the logical progression? All humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. If you're going to notice, I have applied a universal truth to make a specific conclusion. Well, with principle-based, this type of reasoning is more rigid, but then again, if your principle is correct, there is a huge possibility that the conclusion is also correct. Then again, we also have causal reasoning, not casual, guys, huh? Causal, cause and effect relationship. So for example, if I would actually argue that smoking causes lung cancer, I can actually say that because studies have already shown a direct link between smoking and the development of the disease. So it's really important that your cause and effect are legitimate and well supported by evidence. And then last but not the least, for the type of reasoning, analogical reasoning. For analogical reasoning, you are using analogy, comparisons. No? You are comparing similar situations or concepts. For example, kapag sinabi kong, if we can regulate carbon emissions in car, we can also regulate emissions in factories. Kasi parang same lang. Diba? Kung pwede yung emissions sa car, edi pwede rin sa factories. Because they're pretty much the same thing. So basically, what you're doing right there in analogical reasoning is that you're drawing an analogy, saying that because these two things are alike in some ways, what works for one should work for the other. But then again, with these types of reasoning, you should be careful in using this one. Kasi not all conclusions are actually deemed to be true. Kaya you really need to be extra careful. And these are also the things that you need to avoid, no? The common fallacies that you need to avoid. Because when using reasoning, you also need to be aware of fallacies or the errors in reasoning that can undermine your argument. The first one is red herring. For red herring, this is when you introduce an irrelevant topic to distract from the real issue. It's like saying, for example, if we're talking about climate change, and I don't like talking about climate change, kasi sa perspective ko ulit-ulit na lang, ganon, no? Tapos sasabihin ko sa'yo, why are we talking about climate change? We should focus on improving healthcare. Diba? That's red herring. Well, yes, healthcare is important. But then again, if you're going to go back to the argument, it doesn't address the climate change argument or issue that we are trying to resolve. That's red herring. Trying to change the topic and diverting the listener's attention to another topic. And then ad hominem, we've already talked about this one earlier. And then we've also had bandwagon. For bandwagon naman, this is the assumption that something must be true or right because everyone else believes it. Ganun yung bandwagon. For example, sabi ko, everyone is investing in cryptocurrency. familiar naman kayo with cryptocurrency, right? For example, yung statement ko, everyone is investing in cryptocurrency. So, baka it is the best way to make money. That's bandwagon. You need to remember, class, just because something is popular doesn't necessarily mean that it is right or logical. No? Again, hindi ibig sabihin na popular yung isang bagay, isang concept, isang gawain. Hindi ibig sabihin nun that it is right or logical. Remember that. That's bandwagon. And then we also have slippery slope. For slippery slope naman, this is the fallacy that suggests that one small event will actually set off a chain of negative events. No? Often with little evidence. This is actually quite dangerous yung slippery slope kasi one small event lang tapos nakapag-lead ka na agad into your conclusion. There will be a chain of negative events. Like say for example, kapag sinabi kong, if we allow students to retake their midterm examinations, the next thing that they will want to do is to retake every assignment. And then soon enough, they will be demanding no test at all. Nakita nyo yung chain of negative events? From a simple situation na magre-retake lang ng midterm examination, nag-lead tayo sa mga students na nagde-demand ng no test at all. That's slippery slope. That's what you need to avoid also when it comes to reasoning, when it comes to fallacies, no? Tanggalin natin yan sa persuasion. It's actually an unwanted, unwarranted leap to an extreme conclusion. Because if you're going to think about it, you actually have little evidence. How sure are you that it will going to arrive at that particular situation, right? So you need to avoid these common fallacies or errors in order to not undermine your argument, but to further strengthen it more, and make your audiences believe in the messages that you are trying to relay to them. And then, of course, last but not the least, the emotional appeal. Now, with emotional appeal, this is actually one of the most powerful tools in persuasion. While yes, logic and logic and evidence are important, when it comes to emotions, diba? Emotions are what truly move people. If you're going to think about it, ilang beses na kayong na-persuade dahil sa emotional story or powerful image na nakikita nyo or na pinipresent sa inyo. Most likely, baka nga mas marami pang instances na napapersuade kayo or tayo sa mga emotional things na nakikita natin, sa mga emotional stories rather than sa mga statistics. For example, kapag eto na lang class, question. Kapag may nag-present ng statistic na, for example, 90% of the Filipino people suffers ganyan-ganyan. Tapos may nakita kang picture na, it reflects poverty. Saan ka alin yung mas nakaka-catch ng attention mo? Saan ka mas nape-persuade doon sa dalawa na yon? The visual, right? Why? Because it already deals with the emotional appeal. It already taps the emotional needs of the people. Yun yung sinasabi ko. Kaya super powerful nitong emotional appeal. When you are using emotional appeal, you use vivid language and relatable examples, no? You share personal stories. Instead of just stating facts, you paint a picture with your words. You use imagery to bring the issue to life and then make it harder for the audience to ignore. You elicit fear, compassion, pride, anger in order to have this stronger engagement with your targeted audiences. You relate with your audiences more when it comes to emotion. You connect with stories and examples that reflect your own experiences or values. Diba? That's what you're doing when it comes to emotional appeal. But then again, of course, when it comes to this one, you should still maintain ethical responsibility. No? Well, yes, emotions can be incredibly persuasive, but then again, you must be cautious. Because emotional appeal should enhance your argument and not overshadow it. So there should always be a balance between logic and emotion. No, kapag kasi nagfo-focus ka lang sa emotion, hindi yan pwede. Kasi it seems like you are just manipulating your audience feeling. Kapag naman nagfo-focus ka lang sa logic, hindi rin yan pwede. Because the tendency is that if you were just going to present facts, statistics, and evidence, maboboard lang yung mga nakikinig sa'yo. And worst thing is that hindi sila makikinig talaga kasi nga hindi sila interesado kasi statistics, numbers, and whatsoever yung pinoprovide mo without properly catching their attention. Diba? So there should always be a balance between logic and emotion in order to effectively persuade your targeted listeners para there is always this objectivity and subjectivity with regards to your speeches. So always remember, class, the goal here is not to exploit emotions for personal gain, but to connect with your audience on a deeper level, using emotion to strengthen your message in a responsible and honest way. That is why meron pa rin tayong ethical responsibility here. And as we wrap up today's discussion, I want to leave this particular statement with you guys. No, you need to remember this: public speaking is a powerful tool, and sabi nga natin, with great power comes great responsibility. So whether you're speaking to inform, persuade, or entertain, always keep in mind that the ethical considerations are really important. No, in whatever it is that you want to do, in whatever goal you want to achieve in your particular speech. Your words should be used to inspire, to motivate, and change the world, and not to mislead and manipulate other people. So you really need to be honest, be ethical, and be impactful in your particular speeches or in every presentation that you will be doing. And that ends our presentation for today. If I may ask, do you have any question? May question ba, guys? Are you still there? O nakatulog na?
Po. Wala na po.
Wala. Is everything clear? Sumakit lang muna.
Yes po, ma'am.
Opo.
Okay.
Opo. Opo. Miracle.
Okay. I will now be going to upload the presentation for this particular topic. Guys, please be reminded that on Tuesday, you will be having your first quiz for the final term. Isa-send ko na lang sa GC yung coverage ng quiz nyo, pati kung ilang items. Kasi kahit i-announce ko dito mamaya lang, may magchat-chat ulit sa akin para itanong. So, better be sure, dun ko na lang sa GC nyo isa-send para lahat kayo nakakakita. No?
Sige po, ma'am. Thank you po.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
So,
ma'am.
yun lang naman. If you don't have any more question, thank you everyone for attending today's class and I hope you had a great day. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, ma'am.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you po. Have a great day, ma'am. Bye po.